Hi, everyone. I am Lyndsay, like Frank had mentioned, a first-year thesis-based master's student at the University of Alberta. So I'm going to start things off this evening with a bit of history around Nordic skiing in Edmonton. So as such, I'd like to share my presentation that explores the University of Alberta Varsity Ski Club history from 1932 to 1938. So several sources framed the context of my research, a few of which I've listed here on the screen. So Karen Wall explored sport in Alberta, Paul Axelrod investigated university student life in the 1930s, and Ellen Schoch examined alumni specifically at the U of A. The main methods of research for this project were archival and library. My primary sources of information were the Evergreen and Gold yearbooks, the Gateway student newspaper, as well as others. So before I dive into the topic of skiing, I'd like to provide some historical context. So the Varsity Ski Club was formed in 1932 and functioned through to 1938, at which time it became the Varsity Outdoor Club. So this means that the club operated during the Dirty 30s, which was a time of skyrocketing unemployment and instability in the economy. This translated into an increase in student registration at the U of A. As jobs became rarer, people looked to the university education as a possible way into the job market. So at the same time, the Alberta government cut back on funding, bringing construction on campus to a halt, creating a perfect storm of overcrowdedness for students. So it was within these circumstances that recreation became an outlet for students wishing to escape the busyness of campus and perhaps the general difficulties of the Dirty 30s. So skiing in particular became a popular activity for students and Edmontonians alike. So I actually think it's fair to say that the ski scene was pretty booming in the 1930s. So in 1937, the Edmonton Ski Council was formed, which brought together 10 Edmonton-based ski clubs to form an overarching organization whose aim was to promote skiing, create infrastructure, and provide lessons to the growing number of interested residents. Now, the primary form of skiing at the time was Nordic skiing. That included cross-country as well as ski jumping. And ski jumping was actually pretty popular as a spectator sport. So as you can see here in the photo on the screen, this is a ski meet or a tournament at the Varsity Ski Hill. So tow ropes were not yet being used in the city, making hill skiing really popular, which is a form of ski touring. You would ski down and then ski back up and repeat. So although the club existed for only 6 years in the 1930s, the number of events, activities, and general community building the club accomplished was pretty impressive. I've listed noteworthy items here on the screen. So when the co-ed club was first formed, 50% of the executive was female, which for the time frame was rather different. So women were definitely participating in clubs and on executives at the U of A during this time. But the fact that 50% of the club executives being female, that really does stand out. The club's first focus, which continued through all 6 years, was offering up Sunday ski hikes. So these were cross-country ski trips from the tuck shop just off campus to locations in the river valley. So the articles written about these hikes showcase a sense of camaraderie and fellowship. The skiers have a fire at the halfway point. They enjoy coffee and sizzling bacon, and then they ski together back home under the stars. The club also put together ski joring trips on the frozen North Saskatchewan River. This is where students were pulled behind cars on their skis. So you can imagine these trips were both thrilling and perhaps a little bit dangerous at the same time. Another large part of what the ski club provided were opportunities for students to compete in Nordic ski events. So the club hosted ski meets usually once per year, which featured ski jumping, cross-country skiing, and then eventually slalom. So during the 33-34 school year, the club actually built a wooden ski jump in the river valley, which you see here in the photo on the screen. The location was west of the U of A, somewhere near today's Grote Road. The ski jump was used by students, but was also used for inter-club competition, bringing together skiers from across the city and the province. So outside of skiing, the club was very active in university life as it hosted a variety of different social events such as dances and movie nights. The club also organized several ski trips to local cabins as well as to Banff. So a real focus for the club was providing ski lessons. One of the club members, Stan Ward, an accomplished slalom skier from Banff, taught skiing as the ski club coach alongside other proficient ski club members. So I love the photo that you see here on the screen. It comes from a slide that I found at the University of Alberta archives. So the photo depicts the varsity ski hill and cabin, the latter of which was built in the 37-38 school year. The cabin construction was a huge accomplishment, offering club members a place to relax between runs. It's in this school year that the Gateway Student newspaper suggests the Varsity Ski Club offers the best skiing facilities of any club in Edmonton. Although this quote may be somewhat exaggerated, I feel it expresses the pride club members may have felt in the facilities they had worked hard to create. So at the end of the school year in 1938, the ski club became the outdoor club. The intent was to fulfill a greater need of the students by potentially offering outdoor activities such as canoeing, hiking, tobogganing, and skating. So this marks the official end of the Varsity Ski Club as it was amalgamated into an organization with a broader focus. So here I'd like to explore the history of the Varsity Ski Club through a community building lens from 3 different perspectives: within the university, within Edmonton, and then within history. So within the university, the club provided a variety of opportunities for students to gather together in a winter environment. Like previously mentioned, the club hosted ski hikes, dances, and ski lessons. So these activities can be seen as ways to bring together the student community at the university. The club also held working bees, where students would come together to clear the ski hill or build the cabin, which you see in the photo on the screen. You can also see one of the gentlemen, his name is Jack Lewis. He was the dean of dental school at the time in this photo, which highlights how the club also brought together students and staff. So I offer that the club worked hard creating opportunities to build the university community as they thoroughly enjoyed Edmonton as a winter city. Within Edmonton, the club also collaborated with the greater ski community, connecting with other clubs, the Alpine Club of Canada, Canadian Pacific Railway, and the Edmonton Ski Council. So I believe that the ski club's collaboration made them a key element in the creation and growth of the ski community in Edmonton. So from a historical perspective, I argue that the Varsity Ski Club was actually an incubator for female leaders who became community builders after they left the university. So I'd like to highlight 4 of the women who served on the executive of the Varsity Ski Club. So Lois Hammond, originally from Banff, was the first and only female vice president of the club, serving both the 33-34 and 34-35 school years. So she went on to marry fellow U of A law graduate Harold W. Riley Jr., later becoming a mother to 6 children. She was a well-known Banff socialite with a rich and interesting family history who enjoyed volunteering. We have Marjorie Montgomery. She was part of the ski club executive during the 35-36 school year. She was enrolled in a 5-year combined arts and law degree, becoming a lawyer in 1939. Montgomery was active within the U of A community as a sorority member, the secretary of the law club, and a member of the executive for her senior class. So she went on to become the first female family court judge in Alberta in 1966 and was bestowed the honor of being one of 7 pioneer judges in Canada by the Canadian Judicial Council. Joan Hudson held the position of secretary for the club in the 36-37 school year. A distinguished U of A track and field athlete who won individual honors, Joan graduated in the 36-37 school year with a Bachelor of Arts, which she used to teach physical education in her home province of British Columbia. So later in life, Hudson had held multiple executive positions on clubs such as the University Women's Club of Chilliwack, Lindell Beach Residents Association, and Lifetime Learning. And then Peggy O'Meara. She was the club's secretary treasurer during the 37-38 school year. She served on the Women's Athletic Club, competed as a javelin track athlete, and was a member of the senior class executive in the 40-41 school year. So she obtained her medicine degree from the U of A in 1943, after which she joined the Canadian Forces and became the first female physician in their ranks. After the war, she settled in Lethbridge, opened up her own private practice, and eventually became the public health officer and medical officer for Lethbridge. All 4 of these women went from serving on the Varsity Ski Club executive to serving their communities, Alberta and Canada, making the ski club what I believe to be a cultivating ground for female leaders. So next, I'm going to explore the connection between the ski club and recreation. The Varsity Ski Club was part of a larger recreational landscape at the university. The green and gold yearbooks indicate that there were a few other co-ed sport and recreation clubs during the 1930s. It seems that sport within the university context was predominantly found in collegiate teams, with competition as a main focus. Although the ski club offered opportunities to compete, they held fast to their social and recreational activities that were open to all. So this placed the Varsity Ski Club in a unique position to provide both male and female university students with a recreational winter outdoor sport. As you can imagine, skiing was a great way to socialize, meet new people, all while combining recreation, sport, and open spaces. So I suggest that this combination was beneficial to the lives and well-being of students. So I'll read the quote here on the screen from the Edmonton Journal, which highlights not only the popularity of skiing, but the benefits students gain from participation in this wintertime recreational activity. So skiing is popular with students under the encouragement offered by the Flourishing Ski Club, which holds a ski hike and bonfire each Sunday afternoon. The hill west of the university is alive with skiers, seeking relaxation from studies nearly every evening as well. From here, I'll touch on the sport for all ethic that the Varsity Ski Club was built on. So in the 30-31 school year, the Gateway Student newspaper ran the article you see here on the left, stating, "A skier snowshoe club might well be formed this winter to enable all who wish to participate to do so. To our way of thinking, the best sport is that in which the maximum number participate instead of spectate." So this quote illuminates the premise from which the ski club was eventually born, that every student should have an opportunity to participate regardless of skill level or even membership in the club. This sport for all ethic continued on throughout the club history. Gateway articles repeatedly welcomed all students to meetings and dances. As you see in the article on the right, all students were welcome to the club's weekly Sunday hikes. So this sport for all ethic could be compared to today's community sport offerings, like the Canadian Birkebeiner, where the focus is to get as many people moving and active as possible. So as I reflect on my research, I really feel that organizations like the Varsity Ski Club are integral to the municipal recreational landscape. I have a few reasons for saying this, which are: winter sporting clubs have a large potential to contribute to the animation of a winter city like Edmonton. I feel this photo of a 1940s ski tournament in the River Valley is a great example. You can see a lot of people on this hill skiing, but you can also see all the cars parked on the river, the little black dots, showcasing how skiing drew people out to celebrate and connect during the winter season. As well, winter sporting clubs play a key role in community building on multiple levels. The Varsity Ski Club in particular was an instrumental layer in the fabric of the Edmonton ski community. They built infrastructure and ignited a love of skiing for many. So lastly, I would like to offer the following takeaways for my presentation today, which are: sports clubs such as the Varsity Ski Club can be powerful incubators for female leadership. They can provide opportunities for everyone to engage in physical activity. And finally, they drive community connection and building. So ultimately, I believe that the Varsity Ski Club helped to build a stronger, more vibrant place for university students and Edmontonians to live, work, and play. I'd like to acknowledge the support provided by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada in helping me to conduct my research. And I'd like to finish by thanking all of the archive staff that assisted. I'm still in the process of researching the Varsity Ski Club and urge anyone who has stories or photos or otherwise to contact me. I'd love to hear from you. So from here, I will pass things over to PearlAnn to dive deeper into the history of the Canadian Birkebeiner specifically. So I'll end with this photo of the Edmonton Ski Club in 1913, which connects well to PearlAnn's topic.
Hello. Today my talk is going to focus on the origins and invention of the Canadian Birkebeiner. I'm a historian, and my research builds on studies about the Canadian West, heritage sport tourism, and geographies of skiing. The work that I'm going to talk about tonight is based on primary source research with old materials from the archives and talking to people about their memories of the Birkebeiner, particularly those of Brian Peters. The Canadian Birkebeiner Ski Festival emerged as the world's third Birkebeiner ski loppet in 1985. I studied the early years of the Canadian Birkebeiner that became an annual festival and attraction in Western Canada. The main idea that I'm going to present tonight is that the Canadian Birkebeiner began as a loppet for Nordic skiing that combined invented traditions representing Birkebeiner legends, that skiers and skiing constituted winter sportscapes, and I'll talk about how the event contributed to sustainability as heritage sport tourism. There are many stories about the Birkebeiner, and my talk is but one way to understand and interpret its origins. There are 3 parts to my talk, so let's begin by talking about invented traditions. This is an idea from historian Eric Hobsbawm, who talked about how we define and redefine traditions and rituals for contemporary times. The Norwegian Birkebeiner legend can be seen as an invented tradition in heritage sport. It reinscribes a story of 2 legendary Birkebeiner skiers. Amid civil war in 1206, they carried baby prince Håkon Håkonsson to safety by skiing over the mountains and secured the future king who later united Norway in peace. Now mythologized as the Birkebeiner's fastest and strongest skiers, their courage and determination was legendary and fed a national myth and performance of Nordic heritage skiing traverses in loppets. The story was further captured by artists, such as the classic painting Here, painted by Knud Bergslien in 1868 and held by the Ski Museum in Holmenkollen in Oslo, Norway. This story is also reenacted in sport. In other words, everyone can become a Birkebeiner. You can reinvent yourself as part of this tradition. And the use of the past for present-day purposes can define sport heritage and produce tourism. This is a story of Birkebeiner loppets, beginning with the Norwegian Birkebeiner in 1932, followed by the American Birkebeiner in Wisconsin in 1973, and then the Canadian Birkebeiner in 1985. The Edmonton-based Canadian Birkebeiner Society was started by Brian Peters and others in a founding group in 1984. So how did the Canadian Birkebeiner Festival emerge to promote popular loppet skiing? For that, let's start with this gentleman, Ole Hovland in Edmonton. Cross-country skiing emerged as a popular sport trend in Alberta by 1980, and learning to cross-country ski was promoted for recreation, fitness, and competition. The City of Edmonton operated a public learn-to-ski program at Riverside Golf Course in the North Saskatchewan River Valley, sponsored with the Edmonton Journal newspaper. This was believed to be the largest cross-country ski school in Canada at the time. Its manager was Ole Hovland, a longtime member of the Edmonton Ski Club, founded in 1911. In fact, he was an early ski jumper in the River Valley. And he was a member of the Edmonton Nordic Ski Club when it was founded in 1978. Ole Hovland was a Norwegian immigrant from Ryukin, whose Italian grandfather, Giuseppe Carpenini, had been a stone sculptor in the famous Vigeland Park in Oslo. Ole Hovland hired Brian Peters as an instructor in the early 1980s. Peters was an avid skier who taught part-time and was certified by CANSI, the Canadian Association of Nordic Skiers. Brian Peters had grown up in a 4th-generation Alberta family of Scottish and German ancestry at the Peters Ranch east of Red Deer. His father raced chuck wagons in the Calgary Stampede and other Alberta rodeos, and Brian was a high school athlete. Now, later on, he freelanced as a writer and columnist for the Edmonton Sun and the Edmonton Journal newspapers, often covering skiing, sport, and tourism stories. Beginning in 1985, for a decade, he was the executive director of Cross Country Alberta, a provincial ski organization. And when I had the pleasure to be able to listen to Brian talk about the origins of the Canadian Birkebeiner, he referred to himself as the last of the living Birkebeiner founders. Inventing the early Canadian Birkebeiner was his consuming passion. And this grew in part from a tradition of skiers in Edmonton who also joined Ole Hovland at Skokie Lodge in Banff National Park every Easter for an annual ski trip. There they enjoyed skiing by day and feasting and fun by night. Some of these same skiers would become members of the core group that organized the Canadian Birkie in its early years. Their traverses and participatory philosophy of skiing and their style of fun informed its development. Brian Peters skied both the American Birkebeiner and the Norwegian Birkebeiner in the early 1980s. Edmontonians were learning about the American Birkebeiner in Wisconsin from a Warren Miller ski adventure movie that screened at Edmonton's Jubilee Auditorium, a kind of skiing Stoke film of its day. Amazed by the size of the event, Brian Peters decided to ski the Loppet in Wisconsin in 1982 and did it again in 86. Wisconsin's tourism culture of Northwoods hunting and fishing was beginning to generate a new winter attraction all around cross-country skiing under promoter Tony Wise. And so we see the American Birkebeiner reinventing the Birkebeiner tradition and legends. In 1983, Peters decided to try the Norwegian Birkebeiner with a warm-up at the Engadine Ski Marathon in Switzerland. 5 of his Edmonton ski friends joined him, and then they moved on to Norway for the Birkebeiner. Christian Nyhus, Bill and Ken Burgess, Les Finch, and Ole Hovland joined the trip to Norway, and the first 3 skied the Birkebeiner with Peters. Ole and a few of them also made a trip to Holmenkollen in Oslo to watch amazing Nordic skiing competition events. And they were also impressed by Mrs. Nyhus, a mother in her 70s, who simply strapped on her skis to go buy groceries for dinner, showing how Norwegian skiing is a way of life. Off they went to the Norwegian Birkebeiner Loppet at the starting line here, carrying a 10-pound pack representing baby Håkon Håkansson skiing for 55 kilometers on a traverse. And here is Peters off and away at the start in the striped blue shirt. Impressed by the Birkebeiner ski Loppets in Norway and the US, Peters promoted the idea to hold a similar event near Edmonton, Alberta. But it wasn't an easy sell, as he said to me. The vision of the Birkie didn't evolve so quickly. He hadn't really thought of organizing anything this big himself at first, but as he stated, it was only after the 1983 trip to Switzerland and Norway that my utter obsession to pull this off here took flight. And it was an utter obsession, I must admit. Even then, my vision based on the vivid ski experiences of the USA, Switzerland, and Norway wasn't an easy sell. Well, how did it go from dream to utter obsession, and how did they get it off the ground? Initially, he was told by Ole Hovland, "You can't have a Birkebeiner in Edmonton. It has to be in Norway and go over 2 mountains." And others in the Sons of Norway said, "If you use the name Birkebeiner, we'll sue you." He also heard a cool response from some members of the Edmonton Nordic Ski Club and Edmonton's River Valley Parks manager, who maintained it was duplication and they already had an Edmonton Journal Loppet in the River Valley, so they didn't need another event. Well, the tide turned with support from Les Finch, a fellow Riverside ski instructor and World War II veteran, who said to Brian, "We damn well need a Birkebeiner like Norway, so I'll help you." And he was joined by Carrie Askild, a training pal from marathon running, whose family was from Geilo, Norway. Others helped as well, along with various Riverside ski instructors and skiers in the Edmonton Nordic and Parkland Nordic clubs, and so they began to get off the ground. Carl Snilberg granted permission on behalf of the Norwegian Birkebeiner race to use the name in the Canadian Birkebeiner. Securing the name branded the new Loppet in conjunction with the Norwegian legend and the 2 international Loppets. It's important to say The Norwegian loppet set the tradition for a point-to-point 55-kilometer loppet with a pack representing Håkon Håkonsson's rescue. But the American one was taken as the logistical model for the new loppet, with a starting line, feed stations, and fanfare. And so the Canadian Birkebeiner Society got busy reinventing tradition and having a good time. It retold the legend of the Birkebeiners as part of its loppet package. Keep in mind, this was a tradition many people had never heard of in Western Canada, and so they had to explain the legend. And so it was reinscribed in the invention of tradition. It was also reinscribed through artwork and visual imagery, beginning as a simple line drawing of a Viking on skis, and soon after taking on the aura of the 1860s paintings by Knud Bergskleen, and reinvented over the course of time. Reinventing tradition was also performed in costume and itself became part of the annual rituals at the event. Here, Werner Steinbrew as Viking became a celebrated figure, along with others who reenacted this event. And I think we're seeing Phil Dunn as well on the screen. As you see, he is one of the Birkebeiners with so much ice built up on his beard. Well, let's turn our attention to talk about winter sportscapes now. Landscapes of sport and topophilia. In other words, where we do our sport can be considered a sportscape. And the places where we do our sports tend to be places that we grow to love. It's often forgotten that the Birkebeiner began west of Edmonton and only later in 1988 moved east of the city to the Beaver Hills. How did this come together? Well, a core group formed a volunteer board at Brian Peters' home to establish the Canadian Birkebeiner Society in the fall of 1984. The first event was a collaboration of many landowners. It was incredible, really. There were so many groups and volunteers, and it was the only event of its kind in Western Canada. Sun Life Assurance agreed to sponsor the event for the first 5 years, and this made it viable to proceed and expand in subsequent years. Canada's first Birkebeiner started on a cold Saturday morning on February 9th in 1985. The chief of start, Les Finch, who had watched the Norwegian Birkebeiner, used his thumb to warm the official mercury thermometer to -25 Celsius, although it was at least -33. Why did he do this? Well, they feared if they didn't hold the first Birkebeiner, it would never happen again. The race doctor judged it was safe to proceed as there was no wind, but the first Birkebeiner was skied 10 degrees below the acceptable standard according to the Canadian Ski Association cross-country rules. Skiers were advised they'd be taken off the course if organizers judged them to be endangered by the cold. And when they finally took off, the 55-kilometer course was shortened to 42K because of the temperature. Mass start that morning, slightly delayed, involved 128 men and women registered in 3 age categories as citizen racers and in 2 age categories as elite racers, defined by holding a racing card. The entry fee, $20. Loppeters were a diverse group of skiers. They were any kind of recreationist who could get on skis and members of the local running community, as well as one citizen skier who had even had a baby only 6 weeks beforehand. Clad in furs and a helmet, Bob Townsend, the owner of High Country Sports Shop, dressed as a bearded Birkebeiner warrior on skis. And this is what it looked like as they started out from West Ridge near the town of Devon to head to Fort Edmonton Park in the city of Edmonton. There was an extensive supply chain of volunteers along the course to support the skiers. Here we see what's today Terwilliger Park in the top corner, and below members of the Parkland Nordic Club, along with the Canadian Hosteling Association as an example of the volunteer groups who provided support. And indeed, the original route went along the North Saskatchewan River with several parts crossing the river ice. In 1985, it went from Big Island to Windermere Golf Course, and from Terwillegar across the river to the Edmonton Golf and Country Club. It was not unusual for local Edmonton Nordic skiers to ski on the river ice at this time, but crossing the river later became a contentious issue with cross-country Alberta technical delegates present from Calgary. And of course, there was the climb up from the river on this steep section, a memorable climb where volunteers played Stairway to Heaven on a cassette recorder and posted a sign reading Stairway to Hell. Well, this amused the skiers as they were huffing and puffing their way up the steep elevation gain. Peters believed part of the course he had laid out was an old pioneer miners' trail, and such trails were long used by Indigenous peoples and early settlers as well. So coming into the finish line at Fort Edmonton Park, we saw Peter Percy and Pam Bryan, the first finishers across the line. The success of the first Birkie was partly due to the experienced medical staff and ski patrols recruited from the Shell Cup Canadian Cross-Country Ski Championships held in Edmonton a few years before. And the last of the 127 skiers finished with only one withdrawal. Brian Peters was up at 4 a.m. as the chief of race and skied the entire course as the sweep, leading from behind as the final skier passed the finish line. As he said, I knew just about every single person. Afterward, a Viking feast was held with award ceremonies at the Yellowhead Inn. The fastest, slowest, and oldest skiers and others were all recognized for participation in keeping with their Loppet philosophy of fun and sport for all. And of course, there were awards. The next day, there was front page coverage in the Edmonton Journal and stories about surviving this legendary cold ski day. Put the Canadian Birkebeiner in the public spotlight, even as a small and new event in the days when sports coverage was heavily devoted to Wayne Gretzky and the Edmonton Oilers' winning streak. Media personalities Nick Lease and Yardley Jones on the Edmonton Journal staff played up the Birkie party atmosphere, which Lease wrote about in his columns and Jones caricatured in cartoons. Yardley Jones regularly drew the beautiful and colorful event for the Edmonton Journal and was commissioned by the Canadian Birkebeiner Society to produce limited edition watercolor prints as an annual race memento, and they are beautiful to remember and to remember Yardley Jones. Now, the next Birkebeiners, well, they moved right along. In 1986, the second one was Devon to Edmonton. The next one was canceled, and in 1988, it moved to a new location. So let's talk about 1986. This was a year when the racing crowd turned out for the second Birkie because it had established a reputation for being fun, and skate skiing was allowed as a trial. The event, however, had to move on a fast pivot due to a warm weather year in 1988, the same year when the Calgary Olympic Winter Games were experiencing high Chinook winds at the ski jump, and in Canmore, the biathletes were going off target because of the wind. Well, Edmonton was too warm for the Birkebeiner west of Edmonton with all of its river crossings. And so they turned to the higher elevation of the Beaver Hills, east of Edmonton in Strathcona County. Subsequently, this turned out to be a great success, and the lands there became the new home of the Canadian Birkebeiner after 1988. A long supply chain of volunteers, trail work, and grooming, logistics, and later huts were built to support the event. And the numbers tell the tale as the event grew to the 1990s. The period when I'm studying also demonstrates that Birkebeiners were supporting conservation. In fact, their fees helped toward fundraising for conservation in the Endangered Spaces campaign led by the World Wildlife Fund and the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society in the early 1990s. This highlights the role of the Canadian Birkebeiners and how they loved the land, topophilia. They were land stewards, particularly in places they skied and loved. Now let's turn our attention to heritage sport tourism. As soon as the success of the first Birkebeiner hit the front page of the Edmonton Journal, It also attracted the attention of the mayor's office in Edmonton because of its potential value for winter tourism. A decade later, the festival was an established regional attraction known as a destination largely for day trips from the Edmonton region, with a small proportion of tourists who were defined as coming from more than 80 kilometers away. Over time, these spaces in the Cooking Lake and Blackfoot lands took on the identity of the Canadian Birkebeiner, as suggested here, overlaid in imagery of Birkebeiners old and new, along with iconic bison and the Ukrainian heritage village that again reimagine a sporting landscape as the home of the Canadian Birkebeiners. The Canadian Birkebeiner Ski Festival brand inscribed the event, and the event re-inscribed a winter sportscape for cross-country skiing as sustainable heritage sport tourism. Further, the nonprofit society served as land stewards, active in conservation and trail work, as well as stakeholder planning. The festival emphasized Cooking Lake Blackfoot Provincial Recreation Area as a place for Nordic skiing, compatible with environmental management, and also grassroots community collaboration that was ultimately essential as part of the designation of the UNESCO's Beaver Hills Biosphere in 2017. Sportscapes for Nordic skiing heritage emerged as local tourism. If you measure it by a gauge of 40-kilometer travel radius, most Birkie skiers are tourists. And here we can think more about local tourism and sustainability for rural Alberta's future. Today, the Birkebeiner is practically synonymous with the Cooking Lake Blackfoot Provincial Recreation Area. The Canadian Birkebeiner was an invented tradition that originated with a ski loppet and the negotiation of terrain for cross-country skiing. This contributed to making winter landscapes for sport and heritage sport tourism in the provincial recreation area and ultimately the UNESCO Beaver Hills Biosphere. Climate change and winter sport participation numbers are current challenges. The imagination and adaptability of the Canadian Birkebeiner Ski Festival are its creative hallmarks for reinventing traditions. Going forward to its 40th anniversary in 2025, it faces the future endowed by a successful track record as a community-driven event and a joyous part of winter. Congratulations to all of you unstoppable Birkebeiners who reinvent the Canadian Birkie Ski Festival every year. Thank you for listening. Tusen tack. And I hope that I see you on the trails.